Hello again, 102. In this video, we will begin summarizing the impact of global terrorism on the G.W. Bush administration, and we'll do this in two parts. And first, to begin, the election of 2000 was the closest presidential race in American history. It all came down to the votes in Florida, governed by Jeb Bush, George Walker Bush's brother. And the result there made George Walker Bush president. And even though Gore had won the popular vote, he will win in the Electoral College. And this election created high drama. The television networks initially reported that Gore had narrowly won the state of Florida and its decisive 25 electoral votes. Later in the evening, however, the networks reversed themselves, now saying that Florida was too close to call. In the chaotic early morning hours, the networks declared that Bush had won the decisive state by the narrowest of margins, but state law required a recount. And for the first time in 125 years, since that 1876 election with Samuel J. Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes, the results of a presidential election remained in doubt for weeks. And hanging chads! They were using those punch cards in Florida, and that's why some of these ballots were disputed, so they scrutinized them. And this gentleman, Mr. Rosenberg, examines a ballot with a magnifying glass. And this style of voting really created a lot of doubt about the results. And finally, on December the 12th, 2000, a bitterly divided Supreme Court handed down its decision in a case known as Bush versus Gore, and with a bare 5-4 majority ordered that the Florida recount be halted. And this time, Bush won Florida by only 537 votes. That's the difference between Albert Gore becoming president or not. And it changed the course of history in the United States. So the Supreme Court, and Gore didn't dispute this. He let it stand because the election had been over for a long time. So G.W. Bush promises a change of direction. But first, however, the new president had to deal with a sputtering economy and a falling stock market. And by March 2001, the economy was in recession for the first time in over a decade. Bush decided that cutting taxes was the best way to boost economic growth. And on June the 7th, 2001, he signed the Economic Growth and Tax Relief Act, which cut $1.35 trillion in taxes, even more than the famous Reagan tax cuts. Instead of paying for themselves in renewed economic growth, however, the Bush tax cuts led to a sharp drop in federal revenue, producing in turn a fast-growing budget deficit as the Clinton surpluses ran out. Huge increases in the cost of Medicare and Medicaid, the federal health care programs resulting from the aging of the baby boom generation, which still goes on to this day, contributed to the soaring budget deficits, as did unexpected military expenditures resulting from an unexpected war. And that completely changed the G.W. Bush administration's tone. 9/11 is a new day of infamy, similar to Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. At 8:45 a.m. on a sunny September 11, 2001, Islamist terrorists hijacked a U.S. airliner in Boston. They flew it to New York City, where they slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 18 minutes later, a second hijacked jumbo jet crashed into the South Tower. The Twin Towers, 110 stories tall and filled with 50,000 workers, burned out of control, the inferno forcing hundreds of desperate people to jump to their deaths as thousands more on the floors below the points of impact struggled to evacuate the skyscrapers. Quickly, though, the steel structures collapsed from the intense heat, destroying surrounding buildings. Nearly 3,000 people died, including more than 400 firefighters and police officers who had rushed into the burning towers. The southern end of Manhattan, Ground Zero, became a hellish scene of twisted steel, broken concrete, suffocating smoke, wailing sirens, and panicked people. And not too many people don't remember. They remember where they were when these attacks happened. I was substitute teaching at North Tonawanda High School for Mr. John Klimas when one of the fellow teachers wheeled in a television into the room and said, "You got to see what is happening in New York." Unbelievable. While the catastrophic drama in New York City was unfolding, a third hijacked plane crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. A fourth airliner, probably headed for the White House, missed its mark when passengers who had heard reports of earlier hijackings via their cell phones assaulted the hijackers in order to prevent the plane from being used as a weapon. And during the struggle in the cockpit, the plane went out of control and plummeted into the ground near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all aboard. Within hours of the hijackings, officials identified the 19 dead terrorists as members of Al-Qaeda, Arabic for the base, a well-financed network of Islamist extremists led by a wealthy Saudi renegade, Osama bin Laden. Years before, bin Laden had declared jihad, or holy war, on the United States, Israel, and the Saudi monarchy in his effort to create a single Islamist caliphate, or global empire. To foster his clash of civilizations by organizing global Islamist terrorism, he used remote bases in Sudan and war-torn Afghanistan as training centers for jihadist fighters recruited from around the world. And collaborating with bin Laden's terrorist network was Afghanistan's ruling Taliban, a coalition of ultra-conservative Islamists who provided bin Laden with a safe haven. And that leads to the War on Terror, which continues to this day. It's a global crusade to root out anti-Western and anti-American Islamist terrorist cells launched by President G.W. Bush as a response to the 9/11 attacks. So that's the main impact on his administration. It overwhelms everything else. And the 9/11 assault on the United States changed the course of modern life. President Bush was thrust into the role of commander-in-chief of a wounded nation, eager for vengeance. The new president told the world he was going to launch a global war on terror to answer these attacks and rid the world of evil, as if he were launching a religious crusade. And he is a born-again Christian, remember. And he's warning other nations, either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. And a wave of patriotic fervor rolled across the nation. United we stand became the motto for Americans, determined to rebuild what had been lost in the rubble of the fallen towers and to defeat the fanatics responsible for such destruction and suffering. And this then led to Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan in 2001. American and British cruise missiles and bombers destroyed the Afghan military installations and Al-Qaeda training camps, followed by an American-led invasion, working with Afghan opponents of the Taliban. Taliban forces were routed in just 2 months. The Soviet Union had spent 9 years there. This brilliant military accomplishment is all forgotten, as we'll see in Part 2. And on December 9th, the Taliban regime collapsed, and the war in Afghanistan then transitioned into a high-stakes manhunt for the elusive Osama bin Laden, who we know now escaped into the mountains of Pakistan. And this ends Part 1.